here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back into the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. We are going into week 18. It is the last week of the NFL regular season. Some teams still have some stuff to play for in the real game, and some of us out there still have a part two of a championship matchup, or maybe the final game of your NFL fantasy football season. For those of you out there, obviously, best of luck. We are going to try to give you one last good week of waiver wire streamer pickups and starts and sits that we think might get you over the hump. But if you've gotten this far, chances are you kind of know maybe who you're going to go with. I have a friend back this week. Pat, you're back from vacation. Thank God. It was hell without you.
Very lonely.
It was lonely. I did hear it was a very popular show, though. So I don't know if that just kind of happened to be the same thing, but
probably the best one we've ever done.
I would say best one you've done. Absolutely. Contributions across the board. I did get the text with your starts and sits. But no, how was your vacation, man? Everything went good?
Yeah, we had a great time. Spent, some time with the family, brought the dog with us, went tubing and in the Poconos and did an indoor water park. And, we just spent some time as a family together doing all kinds of goofy stuff, baking Christmas cookies and stuff like that. So it was, your total Hallmark, moment there. But I think maybe next time we decide to do something like that, we shoot for something a little bit shorter, because like 8 days of the kids being cooped up together, I felt like Mills Lane there for a little while. I was like, you go to this corner, and wait for my signal. Like it got pretty rough there for a little while. But that's kids. You coop them up in a house together or a car together for an extended period of time, and you're bound to get Cold War type of tactics going on in the backseat.
I just have one, so I don't know, but I do understand. I know it can be tough, and obviously you get to enjoy that part of the holidays. So here's to you, my friend. You survived. Survived
that more than I survived week 17. That's for sure.
I was gonna say, yeah. Speaking of which, while you were away, I got bounced in my work league. I'm out of everything. Of course, now in the Dynasty League that we're in, I'm actually doing rather well, considering I don't need to.
Considering you're out of it at this point.
Yeah. Trying to line myself up for a better draft pick and can't stop winning now, of course. It's just the way. And then, it looks like I'll probably end up maybe getting a shot at the number one pick in our league. That pick is long. That's going to Rob, part of a trade early this season. So,
stop scoring so much, would you? Jesus, throwing everybody else over here.
That's the killer. It's, you look at those games during the year when you had 89 points and where, you needed to put up $120 to win and you had no shot. And then when you're out of it, suddenly your players are like, oh, what's that? You want me to score? Oh, no problem, buddy. I got you. Here, hold my beer. And it's like, I don't, it's just the irony of it. But you look at the most consistent teams and players throughout the season. And right now, that's why you have Jason and Mark in our final. If you look at the rosters as a whole, the Cooper Kupps of the world, the Nick Chubbs, those guys that it's all they do is every week they score. And obviously Cooper Kupp alone is historic pace. But we got a couple other players out there that we'll mention that are, some of them are almost looking just as good as Kupp right now. So we'll have to get to them.
Yeah, definitely. I think I still have one matchup, the one championship that I'm in is still doable. It's going to be a stretch. I think I'm down 32 going into the game tonight, but I still have Chubb and Najee Harris. Going to be tight. I was kicking myself there for starting Antonio Brown in that game. Not that, the writing on the wall didn't tell you that was a good start, but apparently, I should have consulted his therapist before I put him in my lineup this week.
Yeah, that that was some news, huh?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that a little bit before we started, and I mean, I don't know if I feel bad for the guy or if I, it's just another one of these Devo wide receiver things, or if he really, seriously has some sort of mental issue that he needs to deal with or whatever. But if that's the case, I mean, I wish the guy luck. If he's just being a turd because he's being a turd, yeah, that's. I mean, I saw a tweet yesterday that said that I think he needed. I want to say it was like 8 catches and 33 more yards to hit like these incentives in his contract,
and he would have hit almost $1 million in bonuses combined. Yeah, I saw that.
Like can I go out there and play the last game for him and see if I can rack that up? Because I think if with Tom Brady throwing me the ball, I think there's a shot. I'll give him half of that $1 million back and just keep the other half. That's fine. That's crazy.
It is. I mean, and we saw Calvin Ridley step away earlier this season. Like you said, we talked real briefly, and it's sports and it's fantasy sports for us, but it is somebody's life, and you do hope that whether it be involved in the sport anymore, or just as a whole, you don't want to see anything tragic pop off. You really just kind of want to see that maybe somebody gets their ship righted, gets their correct, so to speak, so that they can just move on with stuff. I mean, hey, chances are the guy's on a roster next year regardless. And this time, I mean, it'll probably be good. And unless the league steps in or does something like that based on his antics in New York. It is still amazing to see what happened. But, good luck to AB. Good luck to the Tampa Bay Bucks, except in the first round of the playoffs. Looks like the Birds will probably be playing them.
Yeah, that's a possibility for sure. And I don't think there's, as good as the Bucks are, I don't think there's a team that you would rather play in the playoffs. I think if you're the Eagles, because when you got stuff going on like that in the locker room, it's tough to concentrate and focus on the task ahead. And I know they have a game this week that will probably, if there's any letdown, this will be the week that happens. But you got Brown's gone now for the season. They lost Godwin for the season. Not that they're not still talented on offense, but I mean, I'd much rather face a depleted team, in a playoff scenario than a team at full strength that's kind of coming into the playoffs on a hot streak. I mean, they almost lost to the Jets. They should have lost to the Jets yesterday. I was reading some articles this morning, and apparently that fourth down call that turned into a quarterback sneak was not supposed to be the play call. Apparently they came in and it was a botched call, and it was a bad call. And, you gave Tom Brady a chance to win the game with 2 minutes left, and you pretty much knew that was a foregone conclusion at that point.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I thought, the Jets maybe would have a little something. The coach seems spunky, and obviously, rookie quarterback, he gets hurt during the season, but who knows, maybe next year. But yeah, like you said, when you look across that field and you give somebody of that caliber of player and the overall good team, a Super Bowl champion team, if you give them a chance to do that, pretty much a lock. Like you said, you could just watch him march right down the field and there you go. And there's the game. And it's, like you say, it's one bad call, one bad play, but I think we're going to give people a shot here with our calls, and maybe they make the play, and who knows, maybe they win a championship.
That's the hope. That is the hope. I mean, I feel like at this point, we're both long shots to win any championships this year, unfortunately. So hopefully some of our listeners out there will have that opportunity and take it home. And we would like, if you do win a championship and any of that had anything to do with us and listening to, any advice that we give or what have you, shoot us an email or send us something on social media and let us know. We want to celebrate your victory with you. So hopefully for those of you who are still playing week 18, we'll be able to help you out a little bit more. For those of you who are finished up tonight, like I am in one of my leagues, good luck to you, and hope to bring home that championship. What do you say? You want to dive in and get this thing rolling?
Yes, sir. We can get started. And Pat, I know you got a couple streamers out there, not left over from New Year's, I'm sure, but actual wide receivers and running backs that maybe have a little bit left in the tank based on the matchup. Could be that pickup ad. And again, some of these may even go towards keepers for next year. So again, what do you got for us, Pat?
We always go running backs first, and we'll start there. As anybody who listens to this podcast knows, I go and check the three main fantasy football websites: NFL.com, ESPN, and Yahoo. And now Rashad Penny was owned in like 65 to 70% on ESPN and Yahoo, but for whatever reason, it was only 36.5% owned in NFL.com league. So if you do play in an NFL.com league and you need a running back or possibly a flex for week 18, Rashad Penny is possibly out there and available for you. He was the number 2 overall running back this past week. Now, granted, that was against the Detroit Lions, but Penny has gotten over 50% of the total snaps out of the backfield the last 5 weeks and over 65% of the rushing attempts. He's obviously the clear number 1 back there in Seattle with Chris Carson out. Penny seems to be the guy that has stepped up. And I think that, we talked about him a few weeks ago. Pete Carroll always liked him, always wanted to give the guy an opportunity. He's finally getting that opportunity, and he's really taking advantage of it. And I think that he's making a name for himself. And if he stays with the Seahawks going into next year, or if I believe he's a restricted free agent, so there's a possibility he could be moving on with another team. I think that, he's shown the NFL and GMs that he can get it done when called upon. And the guy, he looked really good. I watched some of that game, and he's got burst still, and he's a bigger guy, doesn't go down very easily. So if he's out there in your league, even if you are on either of those other websites, go out and check and see if Penny's available. And if he is, snag him. You don't necessarily have to start him. It's not the worst matchup this week, but if you are looking for a running back and you have somebody like Penny who is averaging 18 carries a game, I think it's a no-brainer that you could easily throw him into your lineup and possibly get a touchdown, or getting 18 carries a game. The guy's bound to do something. And if he does anything like he did in week 17, which I think was something to the tune of 170 yards and 2 touchdowns, that's a potential league winning type of week. So go out and grab Rashad Penny if he is available. I'm going to go ahead and skip past the next one here, because as we just found out, a lot of the Eagles players are going on the COVID IR. We literally just found that out as we were about to start the podcast.
That's a coincidence, because they really don't have anything to play for either in week 18.
Yes, surprise, surprise.
But one way to keep them safe.
I guess what we could do is we could switch over to the guy that you and I were talking about. We believe is going to probably get the lion's share of the carries this weekend against Dallas. It's probably going to be Kenny Gainwell, and Gainwell has looked good when he's had the opportunity to be a part of that offense. I don't know. I don't understand the rhyme or reason behind the running back usage in Philadelphia, and I'm an Eagles fan, so I don't expect other people to be able to figure that out. But it does look like Gainwell is probably going to be the highest up on the depth chart as far as healthy backs going into this game. Now, these players that were put on the COVID list, it is Monday, so there's a possibility that they could be cleared come game time. But as you and I kind of discussed before the podcast started, more than likely this move to put these guys on the COVID IR is an effort to basically not play them this week, because the Eagles don't have anything to play for. They can't win the division. They could potentially move up to the 6th seed from the 7, but that doesn't really matter. It's not like you're getting a home game, as a 6th seed, more than likely, unless obviously the 7 seed wins out and you win out, which is generally unlikely. So I don't see the Eagles playing a bunch of their players. I do think that Gainwell is a potential start. He's going to get a lot of work, and he's very low owned. I didn't unfortunately do the math on him because I wasn't expecting him to be the guy there. I thought it was going to be Boston Scott again this week, but If you're looking for a running back in week 18 and you've got, say, somebody like Aaron Jones or, one of these guys that, could potentially not be playing this week because their teams also have nothing to gain, I think Kenny Gainwell is definitely he's worth a shot. You know what I mean? He's worth putting on your bench and see what you got and see what it looks like heading into Saturday. Another guy, again, playing on a team with really nothing to play for at this point but pride, Jarrett Patterson. He had a really good game against Philadelphia this past weekend. Antonio Gibson could potentially be back next week. But if you're Washington, why would you play Gibson? You know what you have in him. Going into next season, he's going to be basically what he was going into this season, which is your number one running back. And he's already been dealing with a shin and concussion. And I think he was on the COVID list this week. Like, why bring the guy back and put him into action in a game that means absolutely nothing? So I think Patterson could potentially be the number one back in Washington again this week. And judging from what he did this past week in Philadelphia against Philadelphia, they were at home. I think he for sure could be in a starting lineup and contribute to winning you a fantasy championship. Rex Burkhead for the Houston Texans, he's 29% owned. Since week 11, Burkhead has a pretty commanding lead over all of the other running backs in Houston with just under 60% of the total rush attempts. Now, Tennessee is the number one ranked defense versus the running back in fantasy football, and they are playing to keep that top seed in the AFC and the bye, which is very, very important. If you're a team like Tennessee who's looking to get Derrick Henry back, having to not play that first week of the playoffs is a huge advantage to you. So I do think Tennessee is going to come out and play hard. I do think that they're going to continue to stop the run. So I'm not super excited to throw Burkhead in my lineup if I need a running back. I would much rather take any of these guys that we talked about previously. But if you're really stuck, Burkhead is the guy that's getting most of the work. He gets most of the targets out of the backfield at the running back position for the Texans. And I think that I know you like Davis Mills, Scott, and he's been playing extremely well. And I think that, there's at least a chance that the Texans keep this game interesting and put some points on the board. As good as Tennessee is against the running back position, they're the 31st team overall against the wide receiver position. Not that does anything for Burkhead, but I do think that it does lend itself to potentially being a little bit closer of a game. And in these close games, you never know. A guy like Burkhead could fall into the end zone and, with a couple of receptions and some yards, could end up picking you up 12 to 15 fantasy points, even in a game where you're going against the number one ranked team versus the running back position. And the last guy I'm going to mention at the running back position is Dontrell Hilliard in that same game. While I do think it's possible that Houston keeps that game close, it's also very possible that Tennessee does exactly what they did this past week versus Miami and completely just obliterates the Texans. If that's the case, I think that Hilliard, who's only roughly 20% owned in those three website formats, I think that he gets a lot of what I'd like to call the clockwork stuff at the end where, teams are ahead, they're trying to run out the clock and, they're just kind of handed the ball off. Hilliard seems to, especially when he's not being used frequently throughout the game because Foreman has kind of taken over that number one running back role. Hilliard comes in fresh and he looks really good. He ran for a touchdown this week in that same role. And I think that, depending on how far out of reach this game gets, which, like I said, it's potential that it could be close. It's also potential that it could be a complete blowout. If it is a blowout, I think Hilliard's a good start. But again, that's not something I would really bet on, which is why I kind of just threw Burkhead and Hilliard in at the end. I would much rather, more interested in Patterson, Rashad Penny for sure, Kenny Gainwell, guys like that, where you're pretty sure that they're going to get a majority of the work this week. And week 18 is difficult, which is why a lot of leagues don't continue playing into week 18, because it is sometimes hard to, you stack your roster with all these good players and then all of a sudden none of them are playing. But I like that aspect of fantasy football. I feel like that is a much better gauge on which fantasy managers are paying attention, which ones are engaged and involved. And, if one of the leagues that I'm in this week, a guy, I'll say his name, it's fine. It's my brother Joey. He won I shouldn't say won, it's not over yet, but he's probably most likely going to win a championship. And he went up against Jamar Chase in his, 266 yard, 3 touchdown performance. And my brother's 2 running backs were Dare Ogunbowale and Rashad Penny. And those plays, along with, some other good players that he has on his team, like Devontae Adams and Patrick Mahomes, those 2 running backs helped keep him close enough to where, Devontae Adams was able to help him pull ahead this week. And it's one of those things where he's paying attention. He knew that he had, I think, Antonio Gibson, who was out, and he picked up some guys that he knew were going to get touches. And just so happened that, Rashad Penny ended up blowing up in that game versus Detroit. And that's why he's good at fantasy football. That's why he has won the championship in this league more than once. So that's the kind of stuff that I like. This kind of stuff. I would much rather. I love working the waiver wire the last week of the season because there's so many good values out there that people just aren't paying attention to because they're not big names. But as we all know, opportunity is king in fantasy football. And if you're getting opportunities, you're much more likely to score fantasy points than if you're not. So those are the running backs I think could get some opportunities this week. If you are looking for somebody to fill in, like I said, for a guy like Antonio Gibson, AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones, any of these guys Ezekiel Elliott, who could potentially not play or not play very much this week. I think that these guys are at least usable stand-ins in those instances. As far as wide receivers, I don't know if you want to add anything to this wide receiver core. I really didn't see a ton of wide receivers out there. I went through and I looked at targets over the last few weeks, fantasy production, and really there's only 2 guys that stand out to me personally. One of them is a guy you mentioned to me yesterday, Scott Zay Jones. I have noticed that he's been doing a little bit more each week, but it was kind of, I guess because it was little by little, it didn't really hit me. But when I went back and I looked at the last 4 weeks as a whole, he's averaging 8.5 targets over the last 4 games. And his fantasy numbers are obviously reflecting that. He's averaging over almost 13 PPR fantasy points per game in those last 4 games. And each game it's gotten more and more. It was like 5 and then 11 and then 15, 21, something. So he's becoming more involved now, and each game is getting better and better for him. And I think that, obviously Derek Carr is becoming a little bit more comfortable with Zay Jones in that offense, especially now that they're missing Darren Waller. Obviously the whole Henry Ruggs thing, that went down. I think that he needs another option besides Hunter Renfrow, and that had always sort of been Darren Waller. And now that Waller is gone, he's starting to target Zay Jones, and it's working out for both of them. I mean, Zay Jones is doing well, and Derek Carr is. I mean, the Raiders are winning games; they're still in the playoff hunt, which I honestly didn't think that was going to be the case a few weeks ago. The only other guy that I personally want to mention is Tyler Johnson from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, he's not going to be an 8 target a game guy. So, running out and picking up a guy like Tyler Johnson is probably not the most prudent of moves. But if you are stuck, if you're in a spot where you really need wide receiver help, I think Tyler Johnson's he's not going to step into the Antonio Brown role or the Chris Godwin role or anything like that. I think that he's one of those guys he'll be a role player. But every time I have seen him play, he just seems like he's a good player. He's a good wide receiver. He makes tough catches. He gets open. Brady looks for him a lot when he's in the game. And I just think that, a good young player like Tyler Johnson finally getting an opportunity to show what he can do going into the playoffs, I think that this week might be a week where, depending on how much Brady plays in that game, this could be a game where, Brady looks to sort of form a connection with him so that going into the playoffs, he's got more weapons that he's comfortable with and more guys that he, has that mind meld with that he has with like guys like Rob Gronkowski and Mike Evans. So I think that Johnson's a guy who, if you're looking for a dart throw, he could potentially have a huge week. He could also potentially do nothing. But if you're really, I know at this time of year, you're really stretching for waiver wire pickups if you need to pick up a guy. So Johnson's a guy who, now with Antonio Brown being off the team and obviously with Chris Godwin being on IR, I think Johnson is the natural number 2 wide receiver on that team now. And I think that, he could potentially put up enough fantasy points to be relevant in a week 18 game. Anybody you want to add, Scott? Any wide receivers that you saw or even running backs at this point?
I mean, no offense. I will, honestly, like a Zay Jones, like somebody like that who has come on strong at the end of the season with getting more involved. And again, you've seen that happen. There's obviously some other names that are already rostered, on teams and everything because they've just gotten hot fast. But no, I mean, again, I think a lot of them are like a Zay Jones is like a guy out there who I think some of that was also because of Waller not being there, Moreau not carrying the load, and Renfro really being the only other option. You would think like a KJ Osborne maybe would get a little uptick in usage, and at the same time, that doesn't always transfer over. But I mean, last night he had 3 receptions, 50 yards, and a touchdown. He's been a touchdown dependent kind of guy. He may still be floating around out there. And again, that's with Minnesota, that's really going to depend on if you have Kirk Cousins quarterbacking versus Sean Mannion, Kellen Mond, somebody along those lines. But no, I mean, at this point, I think it's really, if you're taking a stab at somebody, you really just want to look at recency bias, so to speak, in target share. And then, okay, do they have a solid matchup based off of that? Like a Laquan Treadwell had been pretty hot for a couple of weeks. Do you want to pick them up? Maybe. I think Jacksonville is going to leave it all out on the field, so to speak, for their last game. But, whether or not that does transfer over to fantasy points and relevance versus a guy like you said, there's really not a lot out there. That the Gainwell running back one, I will say, is pretty cheeky too, because he's had his best output when it was that game and a half, so to speak, with like Gardner Minshew out there, who you very well might see play a half or possibly the whole game against the Cowboys on Saturday. If that's the case, then I think Gainwell suddenly is a 25-point guy because he's making plays out of the backfield, and Dallas going through the motions as well, because these teams are just really trying to circle the wagons, get through a week without any significant COVID cases or injuries. And again, we just saw that happen with the Eagles. It's ironic that they get a dozen COVID cases going into a
meaningless game.
It's meaningful to the diehard fans where you're going to sit against Dallas, and absolutely. But at the same time, for both teams, they're just angling to stay safe and as healthy as possible going into the first week of the playoffs, because that's more important. And again, it's
when they meet again.
Right. I mean, right now, looking at it, the way a lot of the playouts are, I did see something earlier. It looks like heavily leaning probably to Tampa Bay as being our opponent. I think the Rams are the second option. Dallas, I think, is like a certain series of wins, including a Dallas win, has to happen for that to all filter out. So, I mean, by them losing, that actually helped us maybe not have to play them in back-to-back weeks, which would have been kind of cheesy. We didn't do that well. I think the last time that was Donovan's air guitar game, coming off of, I think it was like the week 17, we dominated them, and then we go out there and get smoked in the playoffs. So, I think the well is pretty dry, but again, there's a couple names out there. And like I said last week, maybe look at like Devontae Booker. I don't see the Giants doing much to try to force the issue with Saquon. Again, he's put up some numbers, but I mean, Booker just seems like he's a little bit more, healthy. I mean, deep down. And again, that Giants team, it's going to be probably overhaul city for them in the offseason. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, right now it looks like the Rams hold the 2 seed in the NFC, assuming all of the top seeds win, which, obviously is a bold assumption, but assuming everybody stays in the position that they're in at the moment, we'd get the Rams round one. And yeah, in order for Dallas to jump to the 2 seed, I think the Eagles are pretty much locked into the 7 seed. I think, I guess they could move to 6, in which case Dallas could move to 3, and potentially there could be another, one of those back-to-back. Just feels like all the Eagles have played as all NFC East teams the last 5 weeks anyway. So why not, throw another one in there against the Cowboys in the playoffs? But yeah, I don't see them meeting again in the playoffs, at least not in the first round, barring some pretty crazy losses ahead of them. But I mean, anything's possible in the NFL, I guess.
Yes, it is.
All right. So if that's it for running backs, wide receivers, let's move into our streaming section. Some of these single positions in fantasy football, the quarterbacks, the tight ends, your defenses and special teams. A lot of people obviously are streaming these positions. I would think quarterback would probably be the position that you would least be streaming, but especially this week, if you're playing in week 18, you're most likely going to be losing some of your top guys. Aaron Rodgers is most likely not going to play. We had just talked Jalen Hurts, probably not going to play. I don't see, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Philadelphia to play him. I honestly, again, with Dallas sort of already locking up the division and not really, I mean, I guess they're gonna want to win this game, but I don't think they're going to. I think Dak Prescott's health is probably a little bit more important to them than potentially moving up to the 2 or 3 seed. There's definitely going to be some quarterbacks this week that are not going to play, and we have a couple streaming options for you if you happen to have any of those guys on your roster. Any of these guys you've been kind of leaning on to get you through so far. So for me personally, and again, Scott, you can add to this if you'd like, if you see that I miss anybody or anybody that you like in particular. But the 3 guys that I have: Taysom Hill versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are the 3rd worst team versus the quarterback position. Taysom Hill's been pretty solid as a starting quarterback in fantasy. Maybe not an actual starting quarterback in the NFL, but he does enough to get the Saints where they need to be. They got to win this week. They're still in playoff contention, which is why I like him, especially in a game against the Atlanta Falcons. I think that, what he lacks in his arm, he makes up for with his legs. And in fantasy, me, I love being a rushing quarterback in fantasy. So I would, if I had, everybody available on the waiver wire and I had to pick up one of these guys and start them this week, it would probably be Taysom Hill. I also like Ben Roethlisberger versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are the 2nd worst team to the quarterback position. Now, Roethlisberger obviously doesn't add anything with his legs like Taysom Hill does, but he's got a lot of talent around him. And that's kind of been my argument for being able to start Jimmy Garoppolo in some games this year, is because even though San Francisco does run the ball a ton, there's just a ton of talent on that team, and a lot of guys can score. And I think that just like San Francisco, Pittsburgh has a lot of talent. Roethlisberger could very easily dump the ball off to, Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, Fryer Musley. He's just got guys that he can throw touchdowns to. And I really like Roethlisberger versus Baltimore. The last quarterback that I have as a potential streamer is Carson Wentz versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags are the 7th worst team to the quarterback position. Now, Indianapolis tends to lean on Jonathan Taylor in that run game a little bit more, but the Colts are also one of these teams that are still, they're a need to win team in order to get into the playoffs. And I think that, at this point in a lot of games, you'll see teams sort of just do enough to win and, not pour it on. I think in these games where you don't want to leave anything to chance, you want to crush your opponent and make sure that, you win this game so that you can get into the playoffs. I think that the Colts pull out all the stops, and I think that you could see a potentially big game from Carson Wentz this week versus Jacksonville. Moving on to tight ends, you have some tight ends, or? I have a couple written down.
I have
or do you
one,
have any
no.
quarterbacks? I'm sorry, I jumped right past. Do you have any quarterbacks that you wanted to mention? That I missed, maybe?
Nobody jumped out at me. I mean, nah. I mean, again, the only other guy. Uh, I don't know. You didn't just say Tyler Huntley, did you?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
That's only because I expect Lamar Jackson to be back.
Wait, is that his name? Does he still play football? uh, yeah, no, I mean, somebody like him, I could see if Jackson sits out because Baltimore's got to like win and have everything else line up. So there's still theoretically something to play for. I think that's going to be a monster actual big game and an under game and stuff like that. He's a potential last minute guy where maybe both teams are just slugging it. I don't know if the matchup's going to give him a ton of points, but and again, the only other guy that I'm big on is, like I said, like Davis Mills. I really like him. I know it's Tennessee this week, who again, they have something to play for. He didn't have a terrific game against San Francisco, but again, maybe just with blowout concepts, maybe he starts launching it a little bit and gets involved. But and again, Eagles wise, just being a little more in the know. Nothing's been confirmed yet, but you might see a heavy Gardner Minshew kind of game where, again, he's a guy who could get you somewhere around 18 to 25 points based on just, getting out there and being the quarterback for the game. He doesn't know he's not trying to lose anything. He's out there to win if he is. That's more speculative, I think, than anything. But no, I think for the most part, again, like a Taysom Hill, again, with New Orleans needing to win and get in, and looking to really just exploit anything with him with the pass as much as with his legs. That'll probably be one of your top picks.
Yeah, I guess you could. I guess you could throw Trey Lance in there as well, with San Francisco needing to win to get in as well. I mean, Lance he hasn't really impressed me in the games that I've seen him play this year. And he's a rookie. He's not even getting as much experience as guys like Justin Fields even, who started 5-6 games in a row. So Lance is probably going to be farther back as far as potential streaming quarterbacks. But he does, again, he is a guy who adds something with his legs. So there is always the potential there for a rushing touchdown or two. I don't see him throwing for a ton of yards. I feel like San Francisco is probably going to run the ball like 40 times in that game. And, I don't see Lance as being anybody's going to pass for anywhere near 300 yards, but there is potential there that he could, rush for 75 and a touchdown, something like that, which is, I guess at the quarterback position isn't the best, but if you maybe throw in maybe a passing touchdown and 150 yards, I mean, it could be a decent game. So, I mean, I wouldn't want to have to lean on him in a championship, week, but
no, I mean, not with this matchup. No,
not against the Rams. Yeah. Right. But I mean, they do need to win this game in order to secure their spot in the playoffs. So I think, Shanahan pulls out all the stops and they do whatever they got to do to try to win this game. So, all right, let's move on to the tight end position then. Who you said you had a tight end that you like this week?
A couple guys that are probably still floating around out there. First would be Cole Kmet. He's got the Minnesota Vikings this week. Again, really, it's based on targets. I mean, he's been the fifth most targeted tight end roughly in the last 4 weeks, which obviously the opportunity's there. He didn't have a tremendous game, unfortunately, over the weekend, but just based on that, and you're starting to see a little bit more of an emergence with him being used more. Granted, the quarterback position has been a little bit of a roller coaster, but now you're starting to see everything settle down. I mean, he was only 2 catches for 25 yards, but it was a game that was not really going to look to go nuts. I mean, they blew the Giants away, which kind of most people thought would happen. It's really just been him and Darnell Mooney as far as targets. Allen Robinson, we hardly knew you. And David Montgomery's kind of taken over big time at the running back position, just in fantasy alone. But, Cole Kmet, I think with the targets that he's gotten outside of a little bit of a clunker this week, he had a couple double-digit games. And, I mean, again, those and a couple bordering on 10 points, which he's doing it all without catching touchdowns. So even this weekend, if he had a touchdown, that would have put him into double digits, which would have probably helped you out. Another guy I like, and this is kind of based on the matchup, so to speak, I mentioned him a couple of weeks back with CJ Uzomah for Cincinnati. As far as targets, last 4 weeks, he's kind of been like around tied for like seventh in targets. That offense is something else, really. I mean, again, we see the wide receivers doing what they do in the last few weeks. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd is still slightly involved and mixing as a running back. But I think with the Bengals getting to the point where they're at and probably looking to maybe take it easy a little bit, I think you might see Burrow or even possibly a backup in there looking to utilize Uzomah a little bit. And again, keep those wideouts healthy. You don't want to go into a first round playoff game and be down on Jamar Chase because you didn't need to overdo it. And obviously those guys did what they needed to do to clinch their division. So they really don't have, they could play for number one, but they would also need tons of losses, Titans, Chiefs, Patriots, things like that. So they're probably going to be kind of locked in their spot, which is roughly 3, maybe move up to 2 again, but they're still going to have that home matchup. So there's nothing they need to duck. So I like Uzomah a little bit there. Another game that's going to involve, quarterback play, getting involved with Carson Wentz. I know you mentioned him. Mo Alley-Cox, last 2 games, he's combined for 5 catches and 70 yards. Jack Doyle's a little banged up. They weren't even sure if he was going to suit up this week. If that's the case, it could be also lingering going into this week against the Raiders, who, again, this is a game the Raiders need. Obviously, Indianapolis needs to win as well to make sure that they stay in the playoffs. I could see Cox getting used a little bit because, Pittman is their number one target guy, and it's going to be tough. They have a good secondary overall, the Raiders do. But when it comes to those alternative options, when it comes to the guys near the goal line, Alley-Cox and Doyle, but I feel like Alley-Cox has been getting a little bit more of a look on that level, and he's a guy that could help you out. And last but not least, another dart, so to speak, that you might jump on. Last 2 weeks, Cameron Brate is at a touchdown each game. I know it's Gronkowski's the number one tight end overall, but given the situation that has just come up with the wide receiving core between injuries and other things, I know you mentioned like Tyler Johnson and obviously Mike Evans is back and healthy, but relatively with the quotes around healthy. That's another team that's probably going to look to just make sure they kind of stay within the 2 to 3 slot for a home field playoff game, not with a lot to lose, so to speak. A Cameron Brate getting the looks that he does near the goal line. Again, that touchdown alone is going to get you 6 points with the reception 7. And then again, you're looking at maybe another 1 or 2 down the line. So he's got the potential for double digits in this last week based off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple guys I want to throw in there too. In the Chargers-Raiders game, I actually like both tight ends. Both teams are bottom 6. Chargers are actually the worst versus the tight end position on the season, and the Raiders are the 6th worst versus the tight end position. Jared Cook and Foster Moreau could both have decent games. This is a game that these teams are literally, it's the Sunday night game because they're literally playing for the last playoff spot basically in the AFC. And I think that, both of these guys could potentially need to step up and both have to, make plays in order for their team to win this game. We just talked a little bit about Zay Jones sort of becoming a necessity in Las Vegas. And I think that while that's true, I think that it's all hands on deck week 18 and last game to potentially make or not make the playoffs. So I think Foster Moreau could play a big role in this game. And Jared Cook, obviously, for the Chargers, Cook isn't, again, he's not the most involved tight end, but with Donald Parham being out with that concussion, Raiders not being a very good team versus the tight end position, there is a potential there that Jared Cook could have a decent game in a spot where he's necessary, basically.
The thing with Cook that got me a little bit was, and I saw he missed the Denver game with COVID, and I wasn't sure. They're making it sound rather murky, so to speak, that, whether or not he makes it back in time and gets cleared, to come off of the COVID list, so to speak. Yeah, I know I've talked about him a couple of times where, you see the targets there. He's just not catching the football. And that's what's so frustrating in that offense that, with all the potential targets, like you say, over like the last so many weeks, and to see that, he's basically been top 12 in targets, but and down near the goal line. Like that's the other thing. He's getting red zone targets too. He's just not turning those into any type of fantasy goal for you or I or somebody else out there. But you figure the law of averages says something has to happen. Now, if he doesn't play, I think Steven Anderson is the immediate backup. He could be involved possibly. It's really kind of tricky when it comes down to it. But yeah, if Cook's available, I think he's just based on, like you said, between matchups and targets, I think he's got to be involved. And we've seen him be a very strong contributor in fantasy before. And I think this is his first year out there with the Chargers. Whether or not it's just he's not on the same page with Herbert or can't handle the heat that Herbert slings, whatever the case may be. The other one I would say, I know with Foster Moreau, there is word that Darren Waller might be coming back this week because it's one of those must-win games. Now, this could actually benefit Moreau more because he seems like he's been more productive as a second, third, fourth option, so to speak, on that offense, where he's the guy that gets open because, Waller's getting covered, Renfro's getting covered. Now you get a Zay Jones who's starting to help spread that out a little bit more. And finally, Derek Carr looks for him because he had a big game against the Eagles, which, that happens because you play the Eagles. But there was also because, especially against a team like that second tight end, that if they can make plays, receiving, have the options to do it. Whereas right now, Moreau's getting covered as a number one tight end option. And, right now he's just not built for it. Whether or not you give him an off season to see what happens, it's a different story. But yeah, I think those are definitely two options if they're healthy and playing, and who knows where we'll be at by Saturday and Sunday.
That's true. We'll I feel like we record these things on Monday, and then by the time Friday comes around, I'm like, well, everything we said is completely like a wash now at this point. And I almost feel like we would have been better off recording.
Oh yeah. My Kirk Cousins quarterback start of the week was like, I was like, oh yeah, he's going to, they're going to get into a matchup and then, he goes on the COVID list and it's like, well, okay. And it is what it is. You're not going to pull out a substitution. So I guess for next year, we'll have to do backup starts and backup sits to account. We'll do two. Play, this is my number 2. And then, we'll confuse the hell out of everybody. So wait, was that your third sit or was he your second start? I'm not sure.
We'll do 2, and it'll be like, it's like golf. It'll be like best ball. Whichever one does the best, that's the one that we meant to pick. And that's who we'll put down for record. And
that's the right one. That was not to be mentioned. That
that other one. That other one was supposed to be edited out. I don't know what happened there. Something in post production. I don't know.
Yeah, things like that happen. Tight ends are kind of slim, but again, that's a different position. Moving on to our defense, special teams. Again, a lot of you are going to have the big dogs out there for fantasy purposes that in your lineup. If you haven't already acquired one, or you get busted on waivers going into week 18 and think, damn, how come? Blah blah blah. A couple teams, and again, these are the way I'm looking at it is that these are like must wins for these teams for most of them. The Tennessee Titans against the Houston Texans. Again, the Titans have the ability to possibly pull off the number 1 seed, which, if anybody can get a bye week, that's the thing. If these teams still have a legitimate shot to get a week off to just kind of rest everybody and get them to a good spot, I think that's something that could play into it. They're playing the Houston Texans, who, as we know, Houston isn't very strong on offense. Again, we like a couple of their players, but again, that's usually a super based matchup concept on that level. But the Titans can do it with wins and then combined losses. So looking at that defense, I think they're going to go out and try to kick names and take ass when it comes to the Houston Texans. Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Baltimore Ravens. The game as a whole, I like both defenses. And honestly, here's why. I know Baltimore's defense has been really leaky. They didn't do horrible against the Rams. Now, granted, Stafford's been on a little bit of a funk lately, which that's something else with the interceptions. And Pittsburgh as well, like where these teams to really be even involved in any concept of a playoff, they have to win. They have to, again, leave it all out there. Either defense, I feel like, based on the way the offenses have been on the other side of the ball, have potential. The Steelers, especially if they're going against Huntley versus maybe Lamar Jackson, maybe a slightly unhealthy Lamar. If his mobility is limited and they decide to throw him out there, and everybody can see he's not Lamar Jackson. He's not making plays. Again, that'll play right into a defense like that to cause trouble, turnovers, keep the score low. And these matchups in these games tend to be just that. Your AFC North, except for Cincinnati now that puts up 50 points a game. But your Pittsburgh, your Baltimore, your Cleveland, they tend to be the low scoring, grinded out under city type of final scores. And again, those all play into what you have. Pittsburgh, it could be Ben Roethlisberger's last game period, let alone in Pittsburgh, and trying to make the playoffs, which they can still do with the right amount. Again, those two defenses, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, I think are really going to try to, and with the matchup being what it is, I think they're really going to try to do their best, and that could benefit you in a pinch if you are really looking for somebody. I would lean Pittsburgh more than Baltimore again, but I would take the Ravens in a one game scenario. Another must win, Las Vegas Raiders against the Chargers. Yes, I know the Chargers are a pretty solid offense. They are barely in the playoffs though at 9-7, but they're in. And again, the Raiders really are one of those control your own destiny type teams. But with a division matchup, I think that there's a little bit to be said of, again, that defense, solid secondary, kind of built to try to take out the Chiefs, let alone the Chargers. And we've seen some games where the Chargers, as good as they are, they just really can't get anything going on offense. I think that Eckler should be back. He should be okay to play. Obviously, that's the way it is, but the Chargers have to win to get in. They're going to be playing hard too, but most people already have that defense. And it's also a winning in for the Raiders. So again, they can also get in with Colts and Steelers losses. Yes, things like that. But at the end of the day, I like them. And finally, if you're really in a pinch, the Minnesota Vikings are playing the Chicago Bears. Bears are the 28th best, worst, however you want to look at it, when it comes to giving up points to a defense. Again, the Bears really have nothing to play for. You'll probably see Matt Nagy get fired possibly right after the game, but they might give him till Monday morning, 8 a.m. So I think as a whole, they're going to just kind of look to get out of there without getting anybody hurt. Again, you've had, good players for them overall throughout the season, but as a whole, the Bears just aren't a good football team. And the Vikings are pissed. They every year they seem like they get to the playoffs, can't get over the hump, or they have a good team and just can't get enough wins. We saw them lose a couple games this year where they should have been in there. And now defensively, sometimes they've lacked, but they do get turnovers. They do get sacks. And again, those are all things that help you out. So defensively, if you're looking to stream, I like Tennessee versus Houston. I'll pick them, but I lean Pittsburgh between Pittsburgh and Baltimore's defenses. I like the Raiders in a must-win matchup against the Chargers. And finally, the Minnesota Vikings against the Matt Nagy last game, Chicago Bears. I just see that being something there that might squeeze some points out, garbage time picks and stuff like that. Pat, anybody on your radar?
Just two. And again, they're both, like you said, they're both winning in type teams. I like the Saints versus Atlanta. The Saints are really good, obviously, at stopping the run. Atlanta hasn't been throwing the ball really effectively. And I think that, again, in a situation like this where the Saints have to win this game in order to potentially make the playoffs, depending obviously on what happens with San Francisco, I think that the Saints are going to do everything they can to win this game. And I think that the defense realizes that they are going to need to put it on their back and, make sure that they give their offense a chance to win this game. And these guys probably are not available because I think they're like the third ranked defense overall in fantasy. But if they're out there, if anybody dropped them, the Colts versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, the Colts, again, they have to win in order to maintain a playoff position. And this is honestly a game that I think will turn into a blowout. Like to me, this is probably the game that if I had to put money on a game, a potential, point spread, so to speak, I would pick the Colts to cover anything, even up to double digits. I think in this game, I think it's going to be a blowout, basically. I mean, that's what I'm getting at here. And the Colts, obviously, they create they're tied, I believe, with Dallas with the most turnovers forced in the league, and the Jags are the worst team with the most. They have the most turnovers in the league. So it's just one of those games where I think the Colts could potentially have 3 or 4 turnovers, potentially a defensive touchdown. I just think it's going to be a really ugly game for Jacksonville. But that's about it. I mean, you could potentially throw Washington football team out there versus the Giants this week, but
yeah. That's another dumpster fire, the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, I played the Bears this week in my championship, and I was deciding between them and somebody else, and I'm just like, how do you not play a defense against the Giants? I mean, they are literally, they had no wide receivers.
Yeah, their best Galladay, and he sucks.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, again, not that either of those teams are playing for anything at this point in time, but Washington's defense has been better the last 6 weeks. They were really bad at the beginning of the season. They went through like a 4-game stretch where they played really, really well, and I think the team actually went 4-0 during that 4-game stretch. And they've kind of regressed a little bit again, but they're still a decent defense. And the Giants' offense is just in shambles at this point. And I think that, again, if all of these other options are not available, Washington is definitely an option I think that you could throw in there and potentially help you win a championship in week 18. But
yeah, not too scared of Pennywise there, Mike Glennon, by any stretch. It's just not. I mean, and that's it. If they had Daniel Jones and a few more weapons, they'd be respectable. But to see the injuries that they've had, and I'm not going to say I feel bad for them by any stretch, but that definitely the football team looking to kind of end the season, and a Ron Rivera coach team versus a Joe Judge, I would take that 8 days a week. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it, right?
Yeah, folks. I think when it comes to week 18 finale of waiver wire pickups, both running back and wide receiver. And then if you're streaming QBs, you're streaming tight ends, and you're streaming defenses, we just tried to give you a little bit of info in case you were leaning one way or the other. We're giving you our expert opinion here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. This will be it for our streamers and waiver wire pickups for the 2021 fantasy football season. We hope that you've had a lot of fun listening, and hopefully we've been helpful to get you over the hump on a week-to-week, game-by-game basis, looking at matchups and different things like that. Again, we do appreciate everybody for listening. We love everybody out there, and we will probably recount when it's all said and done, and go back ourselves and see how right and wrong we were, and start to get ready for 2022 before you know it. So there's some drafting coming up, and different things like that. So we'll definitely see you in the next one, folks, where we touch base on our final starts and sits for the season. But for right now, for Pat, I am Scott, and we will see you for week 18 start sits in the next one, folks. Peace.
We'd like to sincerely thank you for listening to the show. You can follow us on Twitter at the 9Route1 and at Scott from Delco. We put out a lot of funny and informative information on there. Our email address, if you'd like to email the show, is the 9routeFFB@gmail.com. Make sure to click the little plus wherever you're listening to follow the show. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review. Good luck this week, and we'll be back next week with more fantasy football info to take your team deep here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.